Hello and welcome back to another edition of Civil Discussion here on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever and I'm here with my co-host Don Keelan. We're here with I think it's fair to say, a special edition of Civil Discussion. Usually on our shows we talk about civil discourse and of course it's a very relevant topic today, but we're going to be talking about housing, which is another, I guess, important subject for all of us. As we all know, housing has been in very short supply here in Vermont for quite a few years now. But here to share some thoughts and ideas about that whole situation, we're extremely pleased and honored to have with us today Mary Cohen, who is the Chief Executive Director of Cornerstone Housing. Cornerstone Housing Partners was formed last year when NeighborWorks of Western Vermont and the Housing Trust of Rutland County came together, and the Bennington County-based Shires Housing is the most recent organization to join earlier this year. So, Mary, welcome to GNAT-TV.
Why, thank you very much.
Appreciate you making the time for this.
Happy to be here.
And Alex Farrell is the Vermont's Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. The department is part of the state's Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and his agency administers housing programs, including the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, and works with other housing partners around the state. And Alex, great to have you with us today. And thank you again for making the time for this conversation. And on that note, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my co-host Don Keelan here, who has a passionate interest in housing. He knows a lot about it, knows way more about that than I do. So, Don, over to you.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and Commissioner, thank you for being here. Mary, again, thank you for coming down and being with us today to talk about this very, very important subject. I think it's fortuitous that you are here today because on September 18th, the governor issued an executive order recognizing the need for housing and the dire need for housing. The 10-page executive order basically suspended or put into a hiatus a number of regulations that impact the housing. One of the things the governor mentioned in his press release was that the state needs about 40,000 housing units by 2030. And Alex, your department issued a report last year, your 5-year report that you normally do, noting that we have anywhere from 24 to 36 housing units needed between now and 2029. Now it's been updated by the governor to 40,000. What's the end game to provide that housing?
Sure. It's an interesting exercise to do the data analysis to get to these numbers, right? And so the 5-year report that you cite is a report that we prepare for the federal government, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then we decided here in Vermont to take it a step further and set targets. So, all right, great. We can establish the need based on the data, and that said between 24 and 36,000 units is what we need. Well, in Vermont, in partnership with the legislature and working with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency and our data teams working together, we said, what would it look like to set targets? So not only analyze the need over the next 5 years, but what if we were to try to drive different demographic outcomes? We've heard from employers that can't hire. We've heard from communities that are losing population, schools losing kids. So what if we actually were to set targets that would drive those outcomes rather than just try to meet what we assume the demand is? And so that's where, when the governor cites this 41,000 number, that's where this comes from. But what's really useful about that number is I can't picture 41,000 homes. I don't know if anyone at this table can picture 41,000 homes. And so what's valuable about that exercise is that we worked with the regional planning commissions and had them break all those numbers down to regions. From there, each regional planning commission went into Sunderland, Arlington, St. Albans Town, and made municipal level targets. So now for each municipality in the state, for the next 5 and 25 years, we also push these out to 2050, we have targets for what each municipality could produce at a low, medium, or high level, the high level getting us to that 41,000. The reason we did that is we're going through an exercise right now, the future land use mapping process, and this is all part of, some folks might have heard about some changes to Act 250, the state's permitting law, the land use permitting law. In that, municipalities are supposed to work with their regional planning commissions, who will work with the new land use review board, the state body that determines land use. And essentially, folks are asked to carve out the areas where this housing will go. show us where you can meet these targets. And within what are going to be certain areas designated for growth, we don't have to get into the weeds, but folks may have heard of Tier 1A and 1B. We're asking communities to say, account for at least half of your housing growth in these areas. If you think the rest can come outside of it, okay. But basically, show us where the growth will happen.
Do you think it's going to happen? In other words, put it another way, is there a housing crisis in Vermont right now for not just affordable housing, but workforce housing? Because you cover the whole state. We're more focused down here. What's your opinion? And Mary, I'll ask you that.
I would say that there is quite a need. Our last market study in Rutland County, not Bennington, but said the need for just affordable alone is about 2,500 in, by 2026. Units.
2,500 in affordable.
Affordable only, right.
Yeah, and I'd say Rutland County and Bennington County really do capture a lot of what we see across the state, because you have some populated areas where maybe there's more opportunity for some infill development, but you've got a lot of rural expanse between them. And so how do we balance our desires and our needs in Vermont, our needs for a dramatic housing increase while also the desire for this sort of bucolic green space between it? And do we have a crisis? Absolutely. Within the analysis that I cited previously, what we would need statewide to get to ideal vacancy rates right now, in this moment, not accounting for any future growth, but if I could wave my wand, we would need over 7,000 units just to catch up in this moment for healthy vacancy rates, et cetera. So that's scary when you consider that statewide, over the last 10 years, we've been building less than 2,000 units a year. Now, the last few years, that's ticked up, right? Statewide, we're building between 2,200 and 2,400 units a year. That's good. But when I want to touch on the point you made, that it's a spectrum. When we talk about housing units, we do break down how much do we need at the lower income ranges, and then how much do we need at the middle income ranges. And that's why you'll hear about programs that continue up that income spectrum, such as Vermont Housing Finance Agency has 2 programs targeted at the middle income range, so that while we've been putting a lot more focus, energy, and resources into affordable housing development, and we need to do more, a heck of a lot more.
Yes, we do.
We've also been trying to make sure that we're taking pressure off of the affordable housing portfolio by giving folks at the middle income levels more housing opportunities. The concept, called housing filtering, is that we don't want folks competing with our lower income folks for housing units that maybe they could afford to be in something higher, but everyone's competing for whatever they can get right now. So we're trying to alleviate pressure at all points on the income spectrum.
Andrew, all right.
Wow, well, that is really interesting. One of the things I've been struck by, typically what I've heard from housing developers over the last few years is that things like construction costs and labor costs and permitting hurdles are some of the 3 major obstacles they face in trying to construct new housing, particularly at the affordable and workforce end of the market. But there's another factor I'd be curious to kind of get your take on as something that's problematic in this situation, and that's, I guess, the so-called NIMBY factor. You're not in my backyard. So many people I've talked to said, of course, I'd love to see more affordable housing built in wherever, but I don't want it in that field across the road from where I'm living. And I understand that sentiment. To a point, I guess. A home is generally speaking, for many people, their biggest single investment in their net worth. And beyond the aesthetic factors that may be involved, does a housing project across the street, impact the value of their home? So that's a real factor. But I guess I wondered, and Mary, maybe you could get us started on this one. What is your sense of that? Do you feel that those concerns that get expressed by neighbors who just don't want to see something that's in their backyard, has that been a problem for you folks? And then Alex, obviously, I'd love to hear your take on that too.
Not to a very large degree. We take quite pride in in our buildings and maintaining them and making sure that we are good neighbors. Having said that, we are working right now on a temporary shelter in Rutland, and we are getting a lot of pushback. It's a building that we would like to actually eventually put permanent affordable housing in, but the need for a temporary shelter is there, and this building happens to be quite set up for that project. So right now we're getting pushback about this shelter, and it's for families. I think people envision one thing, and in reality for us is much different in what we build and how we manage it. And if there are problems, I want neighbors to come to me directly and let us know, because we do tend to take care of those things. And I think, again, it's what people envision, especially if they don't have information or good information about what our projects are.
And Alex, do you I'm just thinking of a couple of housing developments that have been proposed for down here, and some of the neighbors have gotten a little edgy about it. Is there a way around how to do that, or is it just a matter of like, well, hey folks, there's only so many available pieces of property, particularly if you wanted to build in sort of downtown cores as opposed to sprawl on the outskirts of a community. I guess I think back to my childhood in the suburbs of New York City back in the 1950s and 60s, and housing projects went up all over the place. Now, some of them were pretty ugly looking.
Right, public housing.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Well, not entirely.
I know.
Because Levittown was being built in Levittown, Long Island. There was a drought of housing because of the war. And then in the 50s, the late 40s, 50s and 60s, was trying to make that up. Yeah. So there was a lot of housing developments, and that was the market area I built in the 60s and 70s.
Well, it seemed like those went up willy-nilly or wherever they were needed or necessary, and now it just seems like anytime somebody proposes something that's going to be more than a couple of houses, it's like, oh my God, not here.
Well, that's right. So a few things have happened, right? And we think of this as what stages in the process can a project be derailed or stopped, right? And so we think about this on the individual project level, where someone like Mary's going to be in and shepherding a project through, and we try to think about it at a systemic level. So I'll rewind a little bit and tie back into this land use conversation and why there's been such a focus throughout the governor's entire tenure in office on changing our laws, but at the state and municipal level. So this sentiment, let's hold back development, let's make it, put a pause. What folks have done is create new systemic hurdles more than just, I'm going to appeal the project, but there are several stops along the way that have been added where you could either appeal, have your voice heard to, scare folks off, whatever. So let's look at Vermont in the 1960s and 1970s, growing at a substantial rate. We really were, in terms of the number of families and households moving to Vermont, as well as the number of units being created. That generated a lot of fear on the part of Vermonters. And the legislation that we saw at the state and local level reflected that. And that's what we're dealing with now. So Act 250 went into place in 1980. A lot of municipalities during that time, during the 80s and into the early 90s, began to adopt local zoning. A lot of municipalities in Vermont didn't have zoning before that. So these new ways of managing our land also created new stops along the way where a builder had to come in, and it's one more point where you have to get a permit, there has to be a public hearing, there's an opportunity for folks to weigh in, have their voice heard. Now, public input's good. It's what makes Mary's project so impressive, so beloved by the community, because there's this public input. And there's also opportunity for folks who don't have maybe altruistic or positive intentions to just jump in and stop a project. And so all this leads us to legislation like we've seen in the past few years, the Home Act. So how do we get to this? The Home Act was an effort to say, okay, municipalities, you absolutely, you get to decide what your zoning looks like, but we're going to put some guardrails around that. So for example, if you've got municipal water and wastewater in that area, you can't say minimum of 4 acres for a single family home. you need to allow folks to build a little more densely because it's otherwise a waste of taxpayer investment. So that's one way that we've gotten at this. The statewide land use changes to Act 250, that's another way to say we're going to exempt a certain number of housing units within a project from Act 250 within certain areas. So now you're going to see more and more projects that can go through these, you could say, streamlined permitting processes, and there's a couple less opportunities for someone to appeal, to show up at a public hearing and derail it. But you still have to fit within whatever the zoning is, so the public's voice is still heard. And then what's the final way? That appeal. So the judicial process, this is where folks, like, you know, what Mary does and every private developer out there say, we really need to improve our system, because when this NIMBY element comes up, we've established a standard for achieving standing. So, you know, standing being, do you have reason to bring something to court? We have some pretty low thresholds in Vermont to obtain standing to appeal something. And so projects get appealed all the time in Vermont. And while the courts may eventually say, no, the town was right to issue this permit, or no, the state was right to issue this Act 250 permit, Mary, we've seen projects take, what, 1-2 years to get through that process? So
We have.
sure, we find out, yes, it was right to have the permit, but Mary, I mean, when
The
12
time
months
and
goes
cost
by,
and-
exactly.
right. Yes.
Well, follow up on the commissioner's point here. I guess it's a very serious issue, because in the governor's executive order, if I can just highlight just one point of it, under 3.2, to the extent the judiciary is willing to participate in this initiative, I request that the judiciary, to the extent authorized by chapter such and such and such of the Vermont Constitution and the Vermont statute, prioritize and expedite the residential housing.
That's right.
Now, in Mary's field, a project over in Putney that just got started, they broke ground in May. 25 units, a $15 million project, right? Affordable housing being done by a nonprofit, took 5 years. Right? 2 of those years was in appeal, and it cost the organization $2 million. I don't know how they arrived at that, but maybe it's $2 million because now construction costs
Exactly.
and so forth. This is a very serious issue, because for $15, Alex, you can file an appeal. So you go through, as a developer, you go through all the process, whether it's through the local design review, the planning board, any issues that you may, if you had to go through variance for zoning, the ZBA, then you go to Act 250. Right? Get through all of that, and then someone says, okay, you got your permit? Fine, I'm going to appeal it for $15, and I go to the environmental court, and then I lose there, so I go to the Supreme Court. Right? That takes, from the developer side, now the project is on hold. And you had a big project up in, I believe it was Ennisburg, or maybe Farrisburg, that the developer just walked away from it. It took 10 years, and in our field, in 10 years, it's a lifetime, because things change. Like you've known that, from interest rates change, the construction materials change, the labor, and so forth. Why wouldn't you recommend to the governor, right, having his ear, that what he should have put here, or could put here, if you're going to, I know this is going to require a statute, the legislature. If you're going to appeal a project, fine, that's your right to do so. But you've got a responsibility. If you lose, you have to pay the damages that the project incurred. And therefore, when you make your appeal for your $15, you also have to put up a bond. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't that be recommended?
I got to tell you, it was, and it was in our bill. So this is, you led me right to it. Thank you so much. This is perfect. Oh boy, this is great.
We worked on this before the show.
If I hand him cash after, don't worry about it. So thank you for hitting on this. The executive order was a really important step for us to take as, for the administration. So for years, what have we been doing? We've been writing bills, putting in work over the summer, working with legislators, and we put a bill forward, and then what happens? It sits on the wall. The legislators in the committees of jurisdiction, I'm going to get to that in a moment, in the committees of jurisdiction, don't take it up. Now, other legislators will often take important pieces of that and bring it into their bill, and so we're able to work with those key allies to get something passed. Within the executive order, what we wanted to achieve is to say, look, we understand the legislature has the authority here. The legislature can change statute, we can't. And the governor's attorneys and counsel said, Governor, what we're going to do is work with all the agencies to find all of the discretion that commissioners, secretaries, and thus you, Governor, have to change processes, rules, procedures, fees, any of these that aren't cited in statute, and we're going to go ahead and change them. Now, with the judiciary, you notice this is a polite request that the judiciary work with us on this because, again, it's pushing the bounds of constitutionality. However, we can make these changes in statute, and in our bill that we've actually put this in a few bills now, but I'll cite the one that's alive and kicking right now because we introduced it last session. We go after this appeals issue in a couple of ways. So the issue of standing that I was citing before, we made changes to make it a little bit harder. So for example, there's a provision in law, what we call the 20-person standing. Some jurisdictions call it a petition appeal. In Vermont, if you just get 20 people together, you and 19 friends who don't like that project, you could live 10 miles from it, but because you're all in the same municipality, 20 of you sign on, boom, that's grounds to file an appeal. Made changes to that. We made changes to other mechanisms of interested party, and we set timelines on appeals, and this bond idea, so that you, the appellant, could actually be held liable for the legal fees of the party of the developer. That was introduced in there, and we had some legislators who really are interested in that and still want to have that conversation with us. I'm going to push to have that conversation again. I'll touch on process just so you understand why I mentioned committees of jurisdiction, because this is why, while I'm here, I'm going to ask you all and I'm going to ask the audience to call their legislators. So in land use and this whole discussion, we recognize that local zoning, permitting, this really affects housing. You've developed, so I mean, if you want to make it hard for housing to happen, you can really ratchet up the regulations. So land use is housing, and the housing committees in the legislature, unfortunately, have no say over land use. So who does? It's the Natural Resources Committee. So who ends up on Natural Resources Committees? Well, often it's environmental advocates whose top priority may not necessarily be increasing the supply of housing. So when we introduce a bill, a housing bill, and it's got all the governor's initiatives in it, the governor being a builder himself, he knows a lot of these pain points, and we've worked with our partners who are in the field to propose effective legislation to change our land use, change zoning, help speed things up. Where does it get assigned to? Our housing bill gets assigned to a Natural Resources Committee, and that Natural Resources chair says, sorry, that's not the type of environmental protection legislation I'm interested in. That's going to sit there.
Go ahead.
If you want, did you have a follow-up to that, or, I mean?
There's so much intellectual dishonesty taking place here. We had on this very show a year or so ago a former official of the town of Manchester. He wasn't involved in the time we did our company did a project up here in Manchester. It was to be a 34-unit project. It got cut back to 21 units, and they had changed the zoning in between. We bought the property and so forth to not allow construction on steep slopes of over 5% grade, and you can't count and you couldn't build on it. You had to remove it from your density count, and same thing with wetlands. So they removed that from the our ability to count that as part of our acreage for density. So we went from 34 homes down to 21. Right? And it came out in this meeting, or this show we had, that this official said the town did that to you at the time because they did not want 34 units here in Manchester, because they didn't want more kids in the school, and they didn't want more traffic on the roads. They have since changed that. He said they went back to allow that, the way you had it. But isn't that interesting? So it's subtle, but I don't understand why there wasn't a scream by the administration over this project in Putney. Now, just to follow up on this project is $15 million, and it's 25 housing units.
Yeah.
Math is simple, $600,000 a unit.
Yeah.
They opened up Bay Ridge last week
Yep.
with a whole lot of fanfare up in Shelburne. Right? The U.S. Our U.S. Senator was there, our U.S. Representative was there, and I don't know if you were there. 94 units, 26 will be condominiums, and I want to mention that something about that in a minute. But that project is costing $584,000 a unit, and it's affordable. There's 68 apartments, of which 20 will be used for homeless folks in that area. Why is it costing so much when water and sewer and utilities are right there? It's a conversion of the old Econo Inn, I believe. Why is that? And why are these projects costing so much? And you know, I've written a column on this recently. You probably didn't appreciate it. Affordable housing is an oxymoron. Not that I'm against affordable housing. I'm just saying it's costing so much. And I think part of it's the tax credits. I'd love to have you tell us about that.
Why the cost? Well, there's a lot of things that contribute to the cost of our housing. The environmental concerns that we need to take care of. Oftentimes, we are the ones who are building in the most undesirable or less clean places. I know that has been affecting a lot of our projects. The energy standards have been extremely high. You know, we had to come to a certain level, and I know the governor has addressed that in his recommendations as well. You know, you talk about the pricing of construction. You know, we have to get new pricing every 60 or 90 days while we go through this process, because we know the volatility of what the pricing is and the labor costs that are associated. I think, particularly in affordable housing, you know, we do have to go to quite a high standard of build that I think some private developers don't necessarily have to address.
Well, this project in Shelburne had 15 lenders or 15 investors. The one over in Putney, I think, had 6 or 7, or maybe 9. The one that's being developed in Bennington, Ben High, has 31. And I got to believe, the project in Shelburne had $12 million in tax credits. That must be very costly, and that's what I was commenting on in the column, to bring that into a project.
It's costly, but the equity that comes, that comes to the project really helps, certainly in an affordable space, to keep those rents down, because, if the less debt we have and the more equity that could be put into these projects allows us to hopefully keep the cost down during build. So, when we have public or state investment into some of these things, the ability to leverage that with the tax credits is really beneficial. There is some cost to bringing this in, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of legal fees and other things, but that equity is incredibly important to our projects.
We've heard that in California and some other places, I don't know if it's here in Vermont, that the cost of bringing those tax credits into the project adds about 20% to the cost of the project.
I don't know that to be true.
Okay. But it's just so our audience knows, the tax credits allow someone investing to convert from debt to equity. And their money going into the project now is an equity investment, for which over a 10-year period they can get a 10% tax credit, not a deduction, but a tax credit against their taxes. Generally, banks love to do this because they can offset their taxable income, their taxes that they have to pay by investing in a project. But it is costly. The rules on one firm that does this is 1,400 pages. This accounting firm that specializes in this. Not many accounting firms in Vermont specialize in this, I'm sure, or law firms.
Yeah. So, and it's also important to, it's not just the tax credits, but other sources that come into these deals that often layer in additional requirements. And so what we're doing is these affordable developments, they need the public investment, right? It won't pencil out and reach the affordability levels that we are trying to target if we don't bring in this public investment. Now, what we've done, largely at a federal level, but I'd say to some extent at a state level too, is we've layered on so many other policy goals in what's ostensibly a housing investment that it actually does drive the cost up, tick, 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 tick. And so folks have read the book Abundance that everyone's talking about right now. It talks about this, how for decades, both liberals and conservatives love programs that have great aims, but we've actually overcomplicated them so much by trying to make the perfect program that we're actually making them less efficient. So I'll give you a couple examples. Many of these federal investments into housing projects comes with Davis-Bacon requirements. So this is a labor requirement. So it's ensuring that whoever's working on the project, building the project, is achieving certain labor rates. And oftentimes that's quite a bit higher here in Vermont than what maybe private developers have to pay for labor rates. And so that's going to drive costs up. Build America, Buy America, which was part of the I'm trying to think of what was the name of the bill, the infrastructure, it was Inflation Reduction Act, and then the infrastructure jobs. It was a lot of investment in infrastructure, which was great. But part of this is a new requirement is added. If you're accepting any federal money at all in anything for infrastructure, you need to buy all of your, you need to source all of your materials in the U.S. That drives costs up quite a bit. Now, I said infrastructure, so why is housing affected? HUD determined that multifamily housing, so 4 units or more, is infrastructure. So now all housing, you have to buy all of your materials, including heat pumps or your sinks, refrigerators, everything has to be sourced in the U.S. Again, there we go. Now we're driving, so we've got Davis-Bacon, we've got BABA, we've got all the compliance requirements with income verification, which is important. We need to do that. You can't have affordable housing without income verification, but that takes a substantial amount of staff. And so you add these things up, and we shouldn't be surprised. And now in Vermont, of course, we add incentives. So our what's called the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan, is how each state, each jurisdiction decides to allocate their tax credits, right? And so you've got 9% low-income housing tax credits, which is what most folks are. You're trying to get those 9% because that's easy to sell. And so how do we decide who gets those? Well, are you building in a downtown? Okay, that's a check in your favor. That's expensive because likely you're going to have to do some cleanup or rehab an old building. Are you going to build sidewalks? Okay, now add the cost of sidewalks to the project. You see what I'm saying?
Who makes that decision? Is that your department?
This is created by the organization that administers the low-income housing tax credit for Vermont, which is the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. What I'm grateful for is that VHFA, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, is working really closely with the administration and with some of our partners, such as Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, who's a close partner of Cornerstone, to take a new look at that QAP and say, maybe some of this made sense in the late 90s when things were penciling out right, and even in the early 2000s, but could we give these guys a little slack now and maybe say, okay, maybe you don't need to check all of these great other boxes, but maybe you could also get some credit for coming in at a lower cost, and that could help move things. I also want to think about the root causes. How can we make sure that we bring down the cost of housing development for everybody, whether it's affordable housing or private development? What are some of these big costs that are just whacking people right up front? One of the big shifts that's happened in the decades since our housing boom, the 60s and 70s, was municipalities used to front the cost of a lot of the infrastructure. So let's say there's a property and you'd partner with them and they'd say, sure, we'll build the road and we'll put in a sidewalk on this side and we'll put in the infrastructure. We'll retain ownership and we'll bear that cost because we're getting it back on the other side, right? We're going to get the benefit of all this tax revenue once you build this. Our municipalities don't do that anymore. In fact, even really as of the 90s, they haven't been doing that. So who's bearing the cost of all of this? The developer, right? You're having to, that tremendous fixed cost is now going into the cost of your project. So when the town says we're going to reduce your project from 30 to 21, that fixed cost still has to get spread amongst those units. So one thing we did is we just created last year a new financing mechanism called the Community and Housing Investment Program that basically says, hey, this tax increment financing concept that municipalities get to use all the time, big municipalities, let's scale that down and allow that same financing for an individual project. So now Mary can go and use this future value of the development to finance that infrastructure now. A private developer could do that themselves. bringing these financing tools to everybody, so it's not just a big municipality. And let's try to reduce some of that upfront cost burden that you're going to bear before you have anything cash flowing, right?
Well, we had a developer here in town mentioned, I interviewed him and as an architect before the show several weeks ago. And to get back to Mary's point about the high costs now created by the 2020 Energy Act that we have here in Vermont, and now the 2024.
Yep.
In the governor's executive order, he gives the developer the choice.
Yep.
You can follow the 2021 or the 2024 one.
Yep.
If I was a benevolent dictator, I would say, why have any of it?
Yeah.
Because this developer here in town has mentioned to me it costs just under 20% to follow the 2020 law, and he's built the units, and now he's added another 6 to 8% to follow the 2024 law to the project.
Yeah.
Now, we're all for saving energy and all that, but here again, it's another layer that's going into this, and I don't know how when affordable housing is looking at $600,000 a unit. What does that tell you about workforce housing?
Right.
Now I know as a developer we can do it a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And
I just want to clarify too, I was kind of looking at our cost per projects, and since the concept of so high a cost per unit has been, on the table, and we're addressing that, as affordable housers, we too are looking at every way. And my next two projects coming up are averaging of $475,000 a unit. So we are trying in every way that we can to bring these down.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
that's it here in Vermont.
Yes, my next two projects
Are
coming.
they locally or
Both in Rutland County, but my next one in Bennington will be as well.
you have one going on in Bennington? Because that gets me to another point about the project in Shelburne.
Yeah.
They're going to have it's a 94-unit project. 68 units are rental or apartments, and 20 will be for the homeless.
Yeah.
26, I think it's 24, 26, will be condominiums. They're going to sell between 170 and 190 for 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, at 170 to $190. The project is costing $584. Who makes the decision? Who gets to buy these apartments? Number one, Commissioner, and the other one is why don't we have that offered down here? I mean, I have a number of people whose kids would love to be able to buy something like that.
Sure.
So who's giving away? If the project is costing $584 per unit, how do you buy it for 170?
Sure. So.
And who makes that decision that Andrew McKeever can buy that, he can get that apartment, but Don Keelan can't get that apartment?
Sure. So Mary's going to be able to give a more detailed answer, but I'll give a statewide answer first. So this is a model called the shared equity homeownership model, which the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board administers their state funds. So all of the state funds for affordable housing go to one organization for the most part, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So that's an entity outside of state government that I don't oversee, but I try to work and coordinate with them so that our strategies align. They disperse funds to nonprofit developers across the state and, in certain regions. And for these two counties, Cornerstone is that organization. The three counties up in the Northwest, that organization is the Champlain Housing Trust. So Grand Isle, Franklin, and Chittenden counties, it's Champlain Housing Trust, so CHT. So CHT is the organization that utilizing VHCB dollars, tax credits, some federal dollars that flow through some of my staff, went into this Bay Ridge project. Now, shared equity is the way that generally utilizing VHCB dollars, our affordable housing network will do home ownership, and it's just a mechanism for bringing the cost of home ownership down. So essentially, there's a subsidy that goes in at the time of development to bring that cost down to the buyer. When that buyer sells, the subsidy stays with the project. So there's a split in the equity. So some of that earned equity at the time of sale can go with the seller at that point, the homeowner, but then a lot of it's going to stay with the property to keep that down for the new buyer. So now the second part of your question, why isn't that down here? I believe it is.
The shared equity program is down here primarily in single-family homes. Again, we're just starting to be at scale where we can start building with private developers to create some of these homeownership opportunities. So it's still fairly new on my radar, and I have been approached by, like a few people that you might know, to do these who have some land. The VHCB does give us this grant subsidy. When you become a shared equity homeowner, that property then is perpetually affordable. So the agreement is that this investment will benefit future generations as an affordable home in this project.
Mary, could I just jump in? I'd be curious to know what your organization looks for when there's a potential housing project that's maybe out there. I mean, when you're scouting around for things that you might want to invest in or get get behind, what are there certain sort of criteria you kind of want to see in terms of like a housing project? I'm thinking of the one sort of locally here in Arlington, the Arlington Village Center project, for instance. I mean, is there anything that kind of says, oh, this is a project we could get involved with and make it into something that would be very desirable for folks to move into?
Right. Well, I'm going to give you an example of one in Shaftesbury. So the town of Shaftesbury contacted us, and they have used some ARPA funds to purchase a building, and they want to move their municipal offices, and they want to create senior housing. And in the little downtown of Shaftesbury, so there's this building that could be senior housing, and there's a little neighborhood right adjacent to it, all filled with single-family homes with seniors. And so a lot of it has deferred maintenance. There's a new employer in town. That employer would really like to be able to hire some people, some younger people. So how can we create some affordable senior housing in this building and then open up these homes? And as a NeighborWorks charter member, we have also access to NeighborWorks America funding, homeownership center, education, down payment assistance. We have all kinds of things to help first-time home buyers. The shared equity program to help bring the cost down. So this is an example of how, this is a really exciting project because there's so many components that we could have a major impact. It's the employer that's looking for new staff. It's the deferred maintenance in these homes that we could help impact. And then, of course, it's the senior housing. So that was something that came up on my radar. I was like, yeah, this could be impactful, and the more impactful we could be. I'd like to say it's, whatever's the easiest. If somebody comes to me and they have, 20 acres, it's flat, it's on municipal water and sewer, that's also attractive in some ways, right? Because it's a clean site, and maybe we could get housing in there faster than another that, has got soil requirements that we need to clean or is on a steep hill or is, has different.
A couple of years ago, there was a visit from, and I'm going to forget which state agency it was from. It might have been the housing agency. Came to Arlington and did a tour of a couple of other communities in search of places for infill housing. And it sounded like a really fairly promising project. It was a walk around through Arlington, looked at a couple of empty lots in neighborhoods that you could easily put a 1,000 square foot home in or something. I was just wondering, how is that going? Is that project still kind of got legs in it? I haven't heard much more about it
Boy,
since.
you two are just leading me into just where I want to go. Oh, I love it. So let infill housing and what's often associated with that, missing middle designs. So this is a key prong of our housing strategy. You asked at the beginning, 41,000, are we going to do that? Let me talk about another prong of how we're trying to help get there. So our focus on, expanding not just the number of housing units, for example, Mary and the coalition across the state, we can't possibly ask them to build 41,000 homes. That would be unreasonable. And we need more people across the state pitching in and building homes, whether they're getting direct subsidy or not. So how do we achieve that? Well, let's expand the bench of people who are doing development, specifically who are doing small-scale development. So let's achieve that in a few ways. It started during the pandemic. We finally got the opportunity to test out, because of this plethora of funding, we got to test out a program that we've wanted to try for years, but there was never the available funding, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program. So this is a different model where it looks for opportunities with existing structures. You can use it to build new structures, mostly existing structures, and create housing units where maybe there already is one or it's underutilized and it's not. So let's say you've got retail space and retail just isn't what it once was. I want to convert this into a housing unit. The Vermont Housing Improvement Program will give you, private property owner, up to $50,000 to convert that into housing. If you have an apartment that's fallen into disrepair, same thing. You can get that grant to bring it back online and start renting it again at affordable rates for up to 10 years. If you have a big Victorian that maybe was great in the early 1900s, but you don't need a 5-bedroom Victorian anymore, you can split that up into 4 apartments, and we're seeing that all the time. Most utilized in Rutland and Bennington counties, administered by Downstreet. So these
Cornerstone.
Cornerstone. You can tell we've got 5 partners.
Yeah.
So that's part of this is let's start giving grants across the state to small scale developers, right? So we're getting capital straight to these units, and we've done a couple thousand, well, more like 1,500 units statewide. Now let's look at the other part of the strategy. How do we help people become small-scale developers? Well, a couple of years ago, we created, and it was part of this effort, we created what we call the Housing Toolkit. Essentially, it's a textbook that walks you through how do you do small-scale development. Here's how you develop specs. Here's how you get a permit. And here are some designs that fit in the Vermont vernacular. So we went to Arlington, we went to
Rutland.
Bellows Falls, went to Rutland, went to communities all across the state and had this team of architects draw up designs that would fit into any Vermont neighborhood regardless of the size. And what these designs are is they're 1 to 4 unit focused on infill efforts. And so even the 4 unit, you walk by, it looks like a single family home in a typical dense Vermont neighborhood. The key being showing folks how we can start making the most of these lots and maximizing where we've got the water and wastewater so we can bring some of that cost down, where we've got just that little bit of green space. And boy, I don't need, a half-acre yard. So that was the, okay, here's the toolkit so you can learn. That's part of our Homes for All initiative. So that was phase 1. Here's the textbook. Anyone can access it. Anyone can learn. Phase 2, let's actually do some teaching. We're bringing in educators to teach a cohort of want-to-be or just starting builders. And they're going to go through basically developer schools. So this group of folks across Vermont is going to learn best practices. And then we're going to set up a platform so that those folks and other new small-scale developers can interact, exchange ideas, and learn from each other across the state how they're doing small-scale development. Great. Now, phase 3, what we're calling 802 Homes, but part of this Homes for All initiative, is how do we put that in action in our systems? So phase 3, this 802 Homes, we're going to be working with this same vendor who built the toolkit. Now they're going to take it a step further and actually build specs for up to 10 designs, specs for 1 to 4 unit homes. That could be modular or panelized, so off-site construction, or traditional on-site construction. These 10 designs, the goal will be for municipalities to take these designs and adopt them, perhaps just in certain zoning districts or wall-to-wall across the community, and say these are pre-approved. If you want to go and you want to build an ADU in your backyard, if it's one of these 10 designs, no permit hearing necessary, here's your permit, go ahead. And if you want to build a 4-unit home on this lot that's underutilized, choose from one of these designs, boom, there's your permit. So now
Excuse me,
got
what do you mean there's your permit? Who's issuing the permit?
the zoning administrator. So
Of the town?
That's right.
Under state law, he can do that, or she can do that?
So so this is where it's going. So the
okay.
designs are being created now. The first step is to ask, we're working with the municipalities actually just applied to this. We're working with a handful of municipalities who will be the pilot communities. These pilot communities will do that. They're going to adopt within their own zoning bylaws these as pre-approved within certain zoning districts. A future iteration, once that's successful, what I'm going to be advocating for this legislative session is that we put it in state statute that all municipalities must establish within certain zoning districts that these are pre-approved. And so your zoning administrator must issue the permit if they choose one of these designs. What we will likely hear in pushback is, boy, you're reducing some local control. And that's what we heard when we, with the Home Act, right? We said you can't have excessive parking requirements. You have to allow certain density in certain areas. You have to allow a certain height, even if it's only 2 stories, you have to allow a certain height in certain areas. We've heard, hey, you're taking away local control. This is a statewide issue. To some extent, we don't care if what side of the Sunderland or Arlington or Manchester line a home is built on. We need the home. Each municipality needs it for sure, but we just need these homes.
Why wouldn't the state and all the work that you're doing have what we call inclusionary zoning, where where are you familiar with that? Where and I've used that where we built 900 homes. I had a project in Chatham, this is New Jersey, for 700 homes.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court of New Jersey said under the Mount Laurel housing decision, we want affordable housing, not a different term than what you're using now, for municipal employees to be able to stay in that town.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to, instead of going 700 units, you're going to have 900 units, 50 of which have to be for municipal employees of the town of Chatham or the contiguous towns on board of Chatham, fire people, teachers, post people, and what have you. They bought the unit for 1/3 the price. These are all condominiums. 1/3. So if it was a $100,000 market rate unit, the same unit they got for $33,000. They had to keep it for 5 years, and if they sold it in between the first and 5 years, they would keep the inflation rate. They could not. In other words, it eliminates speculation.
Yeah.
Right? But we got 200 more units to build. Right? That's a great incentive for a developer.
Yeah.
If they could have more units, obviously it offsets the cost. Right?
So
Why aren't you pushing that?
So there's 2 different concepts here. So there's inclusionary zoning, which is one concept, and then there's a density bonus, which is another. And what I think you're alluding to is a density bonus. So we have actually implemented a density bonus. We pushed for an even bigger one in our bill that didn't move anywhere in the legislature, but we're pushing hard for it. So let me just highlight the distinction there. Inclusionary zoning is when a jurisdiction, generally it's a municipality, not a state, but municipalities, as they have in Vermont, Burlington, South Burlington, Shelburne, I don't know what jurisdictions down here have inclusionary zoning.
I don't think any.
They say if you're going to build housing more than 4 units, 10%, 20% of those units must be kept at certain rents, or must be affordable to folks at a certain income level. And that works really well for certain communities as long as the market can bear it. So it works in Burlington because the value for housing is tremendous. It's through the roof. Why does that matter? Well, when you mandate rents, you do have to make up for that with the other units. So those market rate units, you have to raise the prices of those to essentially, self-subsidize those other units that you're being mandated to keep low. That's fine up in Chittenden County because plenty of people will also pay for those market rate units that are now more expensive in order to subsidize their neighbor. So that works just fine. It's been acknowledged that in other counties in Vermont, the market dynamics don't work out so well for that.
The difference between market rate and the affordable rate isn't enough for those developers.
That's
No,
right.
I agree. I mean,
But let me talk about the density bonus, because this is a way I think we can get there. So what we got through in the Home Act, but what the administration is trying to strengthen, if our legislative partners will get on board with it, is do it on your own, and you are allowed to build more. So let's say a zoning district where you're allowed to build 20 units per acre, let's just say. But if you're going to make 20% of those affordable, we'll let you build 50% more. So you can actually build 30 units per acre. So I think getting exactly to your point, we'll give you a bonus. You'll get something extra. So why does that matter? Well, now you're going to increase the number of units. Let's say maybe we even say a higher allowable height in those areas. It allows you to disperse that fixed cost more. So each one of those market rate units now, it's not subsidizing quite as much from each market rate unit onto those affordable units. That's why the density bonus is so powerful. And again, municipalities push back on this because they don't like this loss of local control. The legislature has pushed back because they worry about excessive growth. I don't think those are things we need to worry about. I don't think we have to worry about excessive growth.
I think the thing you need to worry about is what Andrew brought up earlier, and that's the NIMBY issue.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
because it's not just, and we're seeing it here.
Yes.
I mean, and again, I go, there's a 43-unit project being planned here right around the corner
Yes.
on Richville Road. And the neighbors are coming out, well, we don't like the color of the paint. We don't
Yeah.
like the building in a floodplain, and so forth. The property had been zoned. The town's approving it, I believe.
Yep.
Right? But the fact of the matter is, they don't want the project.
That's right.
Right? And then you have other towns that have turned down large federal grants for sewer and water that they
Yeah.
can build. Because in one town, they came flat out and just said, we don't want those kinds of people here.
That's right.
So I think your work is cut out for you. And Mary and Alex, I think we're coming to the end, right?
Well, yeah, I think our time is rapidly running out. I just had one last question I wanted to run by both of you. It's a thought I've had. It kind of is tied into the NIMBY question we talked about earlier. And that is if a community, an existing community, has the prospect of a housing project being built in eyeshot of their homes, and there's a concern about that, would there be any way that a municipality or a town could offer some kind of incentive to those people? Like maybe they get a tax break when they're 5% off their property taxes for a year or two, or something tangible that they could say, well, okay, I'm not really excited about this, but at least I'm going to get something out of it. That would maybe potentially soften some of the opposition. Maybe not.
Extortion.
Maybe. I ran this thought by someone at a conference I was at recently, and he said, "Oh, you're talking about bribes." And I said, "Well, I didn't think I was, but maybe that's what it comes down to." But I don't know. Is that an idea that has ever been thought of, or is it just so ridiculous that it just isn't going to work?
So at a macro level, it is being discussed. I want to say at a micro level, I do want to acknowledge a lot of our affordable housing developers do this now where, for example, and again, I want to say this is another thing that often drives up the cost. So development's coming in, there's some concern in the community, and so the town says, well, hey, look, developer, will you put in a nice bike path that runs along here and maybe a pond for people to walk by so then we can sell that to folks? And of course they say, sure, these are public goods, we're happy to do it, but it drives up the cost. So in micro ways that already happens. Now, but the question is, could we do that at the macro level so there's a state reward to either the neighborhood, the adjacent neighborhood, or maybe to the municipality? I'm going to make 2 points. One, a lot of folks who already oppose this won't like this point. And the point is, the one constant, urban community, suburban community, rural community, the one constant is when you allow housing growth, when you enable growth, and when you invest in the community, you do better. Your economy's healthier, your schools do better, your people do better, your education rates are higher, and your poverty rates are lower. That's a constant. Allow housing to be built, all of those things improve. So that should be incentive enough, right? But it's not. It's not because,
It's too diffused.
That's right. And if I'm a property owner, hey, what do I care? This scarcity's helping me, right? I'll say that. In fact, my home up in Chittenden County, because it's scarce, my home value's gone up. Everybody's has. So in a way, there's a perverse incentive. So how can we reverse that? Well, I think there's an opportunity. The fact that we have taken housing data to this level, further than any other state has, further than Vermont ever has, so that we have very specific targets now for each municipality, I think there's an opportunity here to say, what rewards can the state give you, or what additional benefits could you be eligible for as a neighborhood or as a municipality? Because, hey, look at this, you in 2028 you hit your housing targets, and 2027 you almost hit the target too. So good job, community, pat on the back. Here's I don't know whether it's reduction on the following year's tax rates or whatever it is, but I think there's room for that because we've done all the work now to research what we need.
I know we're running out, but one last point. We could go on for 2 hours, you two guys. I guess it's my age too, but I got to tell you, I think we're not at the bottom of the crisis yet. We haven't hit bottom.
Yeah.
And we're going to hit bottom when you realize that we have no staff to run our hospitals.
Yes.
All right? We have no staff to run our schools
right.
and so forth. We're experiencing that now. When you look at every single hospital, and I've looked at 4 of them, the amount of money they're paying for traveling nurses, for traveling staff to come here, to work here, is prohibitive. The other thing is when I see troopers, where we're supposed to have 12 here in Shaftesbury, we have 8 on duty, covering all the way from Pownell all the way up to Rupert, Vermont. And then another colleague of mine, another trooper friend of mine, he's over in Westminster. They're coming from Massline all the way up to White River, and they're down 30 or 40. When the crisis really hits, we're going to be asking ourselves, what could we have done in 2025 to have made this up? And my only message to you is to get back to the governor and the best you can do with the legislature. We have a crisis.
Yes.
And some people in the legislature, well, where's the smoke?
Yeah.
Well, it's beyond smoke. So.
Well, on some of the smoke, I think it's an area we haven't talked about. We won't be able to because we're going to have to close this up in a second. But there's the whole homeless situation.
That's
You have thousands of people who don't even have a home at all, and presumably they don't have regular jobs and a regular income, and getting from that position into some kind of affordable housing is a gigantic step.
We've dedicated so many of our units to those experiencing homelessness, and what that has done is put a real tax on our property management and the amount of services that are needed. But we are working through that as well, with resident services coordinators being a big part of our management staff now, because we really need to get people sustainable in their homes so that it just doesn't reoccur. But that's a challenge.
And if Vermont, if Vermont had 40,000 more students, right, and Arlington had 600 more kids in our school than we had, which we had 30 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about closing the school.
Yes, exactly.
And that's another really cannonball to come at us.
Sounds like we'll have to have these folks back on another show.
I think so.
I know you want to have it.
We're going to have to leave it there for
Well,
today,
thank you.
unfortunately.
You want to close it? So.
Fascinating subject. Yeah, well, there's just so many aspects to this that are so interesting. But anyway, again, really appreciate Mary Cohen, the Executive Director of Cornerstone Housing, Alex Farrell, the Commissioner of Housing and Community Development of the state, for being with us today to share your thoughts and ideas and thinking about this very important subject. I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about it too for quite a while longer. But anyway, thanks again for making the time for this conversation. Really appreciate it. And Don, I think I hope you got the housing bug kind of worked out.
Not at all. No.
I've
been on it for 40 years.
The surface, huh?
Got to keep going.
Thank you so much for being with
Thank
us.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was, and it's always great to hear you, Alex. You have so
Yeah.
much great information, even for me to hear.
Oh, and you've got all the info on the ground. I love it.
And thanks to all of you who've been with us, and hope you found the show interesting. I sure did. And we'll see you again the next time. Thanks again.